Welcome to your training on emergency action planning. No matter where you live, there's always a weather-related season that you're gearing up for. And you know what I'm talking about. Whether it's a hurricane, tornado, or dry season with wildfires, this training has so much more to do with good preparation than it does overcoming the source. Why? Well, that source just happens to be Mother Nature. One of the only ways we can be successful against these literal forces of nature is to be prepared and trained for what to do in those scenarios. So, all of that said, we're going to discuss all of the emergency action procedures you need to have established regarding fire, tornado, and yes, even earthquakes. Now, if you want to drill it down even further, we'll address topics such as evacuation routes, how to properly account for evacuees, what the rescue and medical process looks like, the critical operations of the office, and what procedures we should implement for reporting emergencies. Here's the deal. We all see the emergency evacuation plan to be fairly common sense because we've been doing emergency drills since we were in elementary school. But let me assure you that these previous practices mean nothing in the event of an emergency at a location different than the one you're in now. Every facility has their specific evacuation plans for each of the potential hazards discussed before. This matters because of what I just said. Literally every site is different. Let me ask you this. When an emergency situation arises, what's our natural response? Well, let's take a little look at our buddy George here and see what he does.
I think I smell some smoke back here.
What you just saw is what we refer to as the fight or flight mode. Clearly, good old George took the anxious path of flighting his way right out of there. Now, I'm not saying the flight instinct is bad. In fact, we've had thousands of years of this instinct built into us for the very simple reason of staying alive. However, it's a fact that when we go into this mode with no plan or practice of exactly how we're going to make it out of an emergency alive, we can easily become consumed with the anxiety that's sparking the self-preservation in the first place. And therein lies the problem with not having a plan. We are left to the feeble hope that our anxiety will successfully lead us out of a burning building or direct us to the proper shelter in the case of an earthquake or tornado. Here's a fact each of you need to understand and genuinely take to heart. Having no plan equals a high risk for injury and death in these life or death scenarios. Yes, they may be unlikely, but they happen to people just like you and I, hundreds of times a year. I don't say that to scare you, I say that to bring close to home this sober reality. You see, when we have a horrific incident happen somewhere several states away or countries away, we send our best wishes and typically move on very quickly without ever heeding the lessons that could have been learned in those events. Change the scenario. A massive tornado comes through the small town of Joplin, Missouri. A hurricane rips through Florida's Gulf Coast, or an earthquake hits Oklahoma. When these events hit close to your home, what happens then? It feels closer. We feel more alert. We start to look at ways we can improve our processes and our plan. But what's missing in this scenario? Think about it for a second. It's a plan. What if your hometown is the next Joplin? You can't wait until after the incident has already come and gone. Don't be the bad example we all look to after the fact. Be the example that leads a proactive approach to these all too common and all too overlooked emergencies. So let's dive into how we'll do that. Starting off with safely and effectively exiting the building. What's the first common sense thing we need to look at? You're right, exits. A few things you need to look at are: number one, where are the exits located? Number two, do these exits have a clear, well-lit path that can be accessed in case power were to go out, or if the environment is so smoky that you couldn't see the path? Now, this also means the exit path needs battery-backed lighting sources. Also, allow me to emphasize number three, keep the exits clear. Stacking boxes, storing equipment, placing storage cabinets in front of, keeping a locked bar running across the door during operation hours, storing stuff on the outside of the building that could block the exit. These are all things you have to address if it's an issue at your office and things we see all the time as we do facility audits. So get those exits cleaned up and lit up. So, while we're on the topic of exits, what's your procedure for alerting other teammates that an actual emergency is taking place and that they need to evacuate the area? Specifically in the case of a fire, where depending on the size of your facility, a fire could have started and not everyone realizes there's a fire in your facility or on your project. You could also find yourself in a scenario where exits could have been blocked by smoke or flames. Now, if you don't already have a trained process, let me recommend utilizing your intercom system, if you have one, and even something as simple as an air horn. The air horn is used by many organizations for both tornadoes and fires. The standard signal for a tornado is a series of long blasts, while a fire is typically made up of short, intermittent bursts of sound. Regardless of what you choose to use, be sure to have that top of mind awareness as to what the hazard is when the alarm sounds. This awareness only comes through a minimum annual training on the topic. In fact, this is true of all emergency action plans. Both fire and tornado drills should be conducted on an annual basis to ensure that information stays on the forefront of your mind and to help eliminate that flight mode anxiety that's trying to override your good judgment in these chaotic situations. We've talked about what it sounds like and what it looks like to exit appropriately, but what about once you exit the building or seek shelter? Let's start with the fire drill component. Do you have a designated meeting place once you exit your building in the case of a fire? The reality is there are several different exits in most buildings, but do you know where to go and be accounted for? Do you know the location that will keep you out of the way of emergency services personnel upon their arrival on scene? Do you know who's taking roll call? Whose responsibility is it to ensure all teammates are accounted for and no longer in harm's way inside the burning structure? Who's been designated as the primary contact for the emergency services personnel in order to get fast, accurate information to them so they can safely and effectively do their job? All of these are questions that need to be asked and need to be answered. In fact, I'll leave you to do that now. Pause this video, follow these list of questions for both tornadoes and fire, and I'll see you in a bit. Welcome back. I hope you were able to assign some roles or shore up your plan in certain areas. These intentional processes are what saves human life in the midst of chaotic emergency situations. They're critical. Take advantage of this training opportunity and make them happen. Moving right along, I want to come back a little and address some specifics on meeting places. Obviously, when we discuss fires and tornadoes, one represents moving outside and away from a building, while the other typically represents staying inside a building or structure to find maximum shelter. Let's start with tornadoes and other major storms. If you have a cellar, storm shelter, safe room, or basement available, go immediately to that area. If you don't have any of those, get to the lowest level of your location like a basement. If you're still coming up short on those options, get to a windowless interior room such as a bathroom, closet, or inner hallway. Stay as far from windows as possible. The reason you want to get to the center of the room is because corners tend to attract debris. If possible, get under a sturdy piece of furniture such as a heavy table or desk and hold on tight. If you can, protect your head and neck with a blanket or pillow. If you're driving and wanting to pull over to a business or structure, do your best to avoid places with wide span roofs such as auditoriums, cafeterias, gymnasiums, large hallways, or open warehouses. Those places are basically giant pieces of shrapnel. If you're working outside, do your best to get inside a building. If shelter isn't available or there's no time to get indoors, lay down in a ditch, some sort of low-lying area, or crouch near a strong building. Basically, what you're trying to do here is to protect yourself from flying debris. Get in a fetal position and use your arms to protect your head and neck. Also be aware of flash flooding. If you're in a vehicle, never try and outrun a tornado. Tornadoes can change direction quickly and can instantly take your car or truck and toss it through the air. The best case is to get out of your vehicle and take shelter in a nearby building. But remember, pick a building that's not a warehouse or filled with glass windows. That's a horrible plan. A couple final points I'd like to make on both tornadoes and fires. Never go back to get your personal items, to get cell phones, purses, or bags, because you could very well be putting yourself directly in harm's way. Please just follow the protocol and get to your shelter or meeting area as quickly as possible. This eliminates mass confusion, and it also keeps everyone working towards the same goal of getting to safety much quicker. It also keeps the emergency services personnel from having to risk their lives, thinking you may be trapped, when in reality, you're just not where you're supposed to be. Also, be sure to never leave your facility without being accounted for that exact same reason. Check in with whoever is designated to take roll call before any decisions like that are made. Let's take a minute and talk about medical assistance during these types of events. Obviously, we'll be contacting emergency services personnel to come and assist, but the reality is, time isn't always on our side. The likelihood of multiple fires going at the same time is slim, but in many cases, you may be dealing with smaller local emergency services departments, or even busy departments that could be responding to a vehicle crash or some other incident that lengthens their response time. Especially in the case of a tornado, you will not be the only one needing their help. This is where CPR and first aid can really come into play. I highly recommend this training for you and your teammates because the stats don't lie. This training keeps people alive. Once you get yourself or some of your teammates trained, be sure they are a part of the emergency response plan at the office. This is a simple but important point and can both sustain and save lives in the event of an emergency. One final point on this topic, and I alluded to it earlier, but talking to firemen about these incidents in the past, they all say the same thing. Designate one point of contact that can assist them with information on the scene, information about the facility itself, and information on the evacuees. Understand that they are arriving on the scene with very limited knowledge of what's happening, and the faster they can jump into action with accurate information, the faster they can get to saving lives, putting out fires, and digging through rubble if need be. Designated that point person is critical to the degree of success you'll have during an emergency. In closing, I want to touch very briefly on what to do in the case of an earthquake. Now, I'm not sure I would fully know what's happening even if an earthquake were to occur, but I will put this very simply and tell you what the experts say. Follow similar procedures you would do for both a tornado and a fire drill. By that, I mean that you initially want to take shelter just like you would with a tornado, because what are you trying to protect against? That's right, falling objects. So do your best to take shelter under a table, desk, or doorway to prevent any head injuries. Once things have seemingly settled, you'll want to follow the same evacuation procedures you would with a fire drill. Have the designated person take a roll call, ensure everyone is accounted for, and then, and this is important, don't enter the office, facility, or visiting site again until the structure has been cleared for re-entry. This is important because you don't know what could have been knocked loose and could be on the verge of collapsing, whether that be the building itself or more likely materials on bookshelves, racks, or various overhead storage. So work with a competent person or emergency services personnel before you regain entry. Look, these issues don't seem to be top of the list type worries until you need to worry about them. And by then it's too late to develop a plan. Be proactive, be diligent, and be consistent with a minimum of an annual fire drill and tornado drill. It will pay huge dividends in the time you need it most. Those fight or flight moments when anxiety is quick to take control of your mind. Do yourself and your teammates a favor by having a plan in place that will give each of you the best possible chance of survival. I'm Jake Wolfenden, and please remember to reach out with any questions. Part of your service is the ability to gain direct access to myself and my team. We'll be happy to serve you the best we can. Until the next training, have an awesome day.